This should probably be called LocalGov Elections version 3 progress update rather than demo. I will demo where we are, but the demo doesn't look a great deal different to version 2, and I'll explain why shortly. Oh. Voucher, my name is Dan Champion. I'm a Drupal engineer at Rohallion. I'm co-maintainer of the news, waste collection and elections, LocalGov Drupal modules. For those who don't know, I have a background in LocalGov web accessibility, amongst other things. So I'm going to rattle through this. We've got 20 minutes, which isn't a great deal of time. So I'm going to try not to be too detailed because I have a habit of doing that with some of these things. So what's changing in Elections v3? The main driver behind this version was support for multi-seat electoral area elections. So first past the post, that is. So for viewers in Scotland and possibly elsewhere, there's no support in this for proportional representation, single transferable vote. This is very much multi-seat first past the post. Plus support for partial elections, where maybe not all seats in an area will be up for election in any given year or election. I'll demonstrate all of this after I've run through the list. Support for ties. There is obviously there's a possibility in election for a tie. There was no support previously, so there is now a mechanism for election administrators to indicate which a candidate won a tie and have that reflected in results automatically. We've introduced a configurable boundary provider. So the boundary provider in LocalGov Elections, when you create an election, you basically import boundaries. So that boundary will be include the name of the electoral area and also the geographic boundary so that we can map it. In previous versions, there was a boundary provider submodule for each collection of boundaries. So if the boundaries changed between 2022 and 2024, there would need to be two modules produced, one for 2022, one for 2024. Users would have to install that module, configure it. So it was a developer task. We've now produced this configurable boundary provider, which looks scary, but I'll explain why it needn't be scary. And it should provide 99% of coverage for future elections in terms of boundaries and automatically importing all of the areas that are required for an election. So I will give a brief view of that because it is quite complex on the face of it. We're introducing support for publishing electoral or election notices, so things like candidate lists, polling station, whatever you want, actually. This is just basically a flexible way of attaching HTML pages to an election with a title and some metadata, pre-election if that's what you need to do, if this meets that need that you have, and for archive purposes post-election. There's the function been added to duplicate an election. So one of the things, like the configurable boundary provider and this duplicate election function, is just to try and smooth the way when you're using the modules to set up a new election. So if your boundaries are largely unchanged, an election in 4 years' time may be very like an election today. So the duplicate election function basically lets you do that. It pulls in it creates a copy of the election, all of the related records, all unpublished, so that you can use that as a starting point for a new election. Probably the most impactful is improved front-end user experience. This is in progress. So what I'm going to show you when I demonstrate this, and this is kind of probably the biggest caveat, the end product will not look very much like it. We had our first meeting yesterday to discuss this, and I'll share some of that if I've got time as well. We're also trying to improve the admin UX. So at Dev Days last week, there was work done on this. Shout out to Graham at WebCurl in particular, who helped out with this. So again, that's in progress and will be coming soon. So there's a lot coming. There's a lot in progress. So it may be that we want to do something like this in a number of weeks. But obviously, with elections in May, time is of the essence. So I'm going to jump across to a browser now. I have a. Oh, it shouldn't look like that. Let me just refresh that. There we go. The other thing that's been updated in the module is demo data. So this module comes with two demo election sets of data, one for a general election, and which is obviously first past the post single seat, and for this one, local government elections, which is first past the post, but with a default of 2 seats per area. So those of you who maybe have seen elections before, this doesn't look a great deal different. Certainly you wouldn't know from this, but if we move down to the actual results, so these are the areas. Like all of the demo data before, this is based around Oxford, just I don't know why, but for demo purposes. So these are the areas. Again, a big caveat, the presentation here is going to change. So Carfax and Jericho is a 2-seat area, has 2 winners. Holywell is a 2-seat area, but this candidate was not contested, so they were in a seat where this was probably an incumbent and it wasn't an all-out election. Marston had a tie. We have a tie winner here. There must have been another third candidate or second candidate with 1, 2, 3, 4 votes. Osney and St Thomas has an additional seat because, as anyone who knows this domain will know, number of seats can vary depending on the size of the area and the geographic makeup of it. And the other two are standard areas. Electoral mapping. Again, this may change in presentation. This was quite challenging to get this even to this stage. So at the moment, we've gone with a horizontal division, coloured depending on the parties that have won. So in this area here, we can see 2/3. I guess you could infer that 2/3 is red and a third is orange. Clicking on the map currently shows you the name of the area and the number of seats. So again, there is discussion to be had around this with the UX. I guess this is Holywell. This shows the makeup of the council or the area post-election, but it doesn't reflect the election where only one of these seats was elected. So we need to work on the presentation of a lot of this data. Results timeline has had a bit of an overhaul as well. So this is where within an area, as I'll demonstrate shortly, an administrator can specify the date and time at which results were finalized. I guess that could be a declaration date. I'm not entirely sure. And it produces this basic timeline where we have the date, the area, the number of seats that are within that area, the elected candidates, the number of votes cast, and the candidates that were not successful. Again, I'm going to keep saying this. We had some interesting discussions yesterday about how we can make this a lot more engaging as a timeline. I think presentation, it could be improved. Share of the vote is a basic table showing the percentage share. It's a bit more complicated behind the scenes because of the nature of the data in this multi-seat election. So just to show you behind the scenes here, this is really where most of the work has happened. I'm going to flip to a tab now where I'm signed in. I wasn't signed in there. So this is the same election, but I'm now signed in and I want to show you. So this is the Marston area. And if I edit this area, this takes me to the back end system where I can manage everything about this area from this one location. So I can manage the gross details about the name, the title that we present, electorate, which election it's related to, the number of seats within this area. So I can add additional seats if this had more. I can remove one of these seats if it only has 1 seat. The list of candidates. This is unchanged. This browser here allowed you to attach a PDF to the area, which was a list of candidates. We don't know if that's going to be superseded by notices or if it will sit alongside notices. That's still to be determined. This is our votes finalized toggle, which determines that these votes are confirmed and counted, and we want to publish them on the website to appear in the timeline to be counted in the various calculations. And here we have the date and time at which the vote was finalized. If none of these seats were contested, we can toggle this, and every seat in here will be deemed as uncontested. So these are the actual candidates. So we have 5 candidates standing here. If I edit one of these, you'll see we have this candidate name details, the party, and the number of votes. If we want to add a candidate, we can do that at any point in time. Oops. Dribbles first. Overall results allows us to provide a number of spoiled papers. Previous election, we were in discussion about for multi-seat elections, whether this makes sense. If it does make sense, how we manage where there may be three incumbents and one has changed and two haven't. There's no concept of hold and gain in a specific seat because the seat is within the whole area. So there's discussion around whether we do a previous election, a change in this election. So if I go back to Holywell, the candidate I added, oops, was I in Holywell? Anyway, I'm losing the plot a bit on that. Excuse me. Um, Support for ties we looked at. I've just shown multi-seats. Configurable boundary provider. So for those, again, who are familiar with this module, boundaries sit in structure boundary sources. You can see we've got an ONS 2025 wards, which was used for the demo data. If I choose to add a configurable provider, you'll see how complex this form actually is. So this is the manual way of providing a new boundary source using the configurable provider. There's a lot of information here. There's filters, there's a listing API, external API, there's a boundary external API, and there's additional parameters. However, what we've provided is an import configuration option as well. So the plan here would be that we will provide you, and you can either upload a YAML file or paste YAML configuration, is that we at LocalGov Drupal or other local authorities, however we manage this, will produce a library, if you like, of these configuration boundary source configurations. There are some included. I'm just going to flip over. Actually, I've probably got it in my. Bear with me, please. So there are samples of this provided in the module. So I've just pasted in some YAML here from the module. This is basically the 2025 ONS ward boundary provider data. It asks me to give it a name, so I'm going to call it Walsall because and I filter this using an LAD 25 CD code, which I believe Walsall's. Let me just flip over. Walsall's is there. And I now have that boundary provider configured. So when I create actually, we can do this with an existing election. If I go to an existing election, our local government elections, I can add areas from here. And we can now see the wards from Walsall. It will go away, query our API. APIs show us the wards that are in Walsall, and I can fetch those, and they will now be added to this election. If I go to the electoral map, we'll now have a bizarre situation where we have both Oxford and Walsall in the same election. But just for demo purposes. So this is the Walsall data all imported now with the default two seats for this election, the area names, and the mapping all imported. So as I say, we did quite a lot of work on trying to make this as easy as possible for administrators. Me whizzing through that may not look easy, but the documentation is updated. It's all there for people to use. Duplicate election, I'm not going to demonstrate that, but I will show you where the tab is. If I'm on an election landing page, I have a duplicate function here. It would just ask me to give it a name and it will then chunter away and create a copy of everything.